So, we're here today with Dr. Terry Willard. Terry, hi, it's great to have you here.
Nice to see you.
So, Terry is the founder of Wild Rose College and has decades, over 5 decades of clinical experience. And we'd love to hear, Terry, how you got here. How did you get into the herbal world?
Well, it's serendipity, so a lot of coincidences, but I tend not to believe in coincidences, so I think I was destined. Um, I believe in past lifetimes, and now I know many other lifetimes that I've done the same role, so I think I'm destined. But in the mundane plane, what actually happened is a mistake of a academic summer job. I was in university. I think I was going from second year to third year, and I applied for a summer job. And it was an ecological job because I was studying environmental biology. And at that point in time, what I thought I was doing was applying for a job, and I got hired to study small mammals after a fire thing that happens in the Vermilion Pass, which is between Banff and Fairmont area. Banff and Radium area, and what I did is got there the first day and found out they hired another person who had a master's degree already in small manual mammal behaviorism. And as I was walking away, get fired my first day on work, he says, "Do you know anything about plants? We don't have a botanist." And in my own head, I says, "Plants, yeah, they're green. I know all kinds of things about botany." Of course, I was a wilderness enthusiast at that point in time, so I did know some things, but I didn't know that much. And so I studied heavily at every night, went out in the area. I was counting plants in certain areas to see what grew as a fire succession. And lots of times I was really not knowing the names of the plants. So I name them after some of my friends. So I name this plant and this plant of my friends. I get back at night and go through books, try to find out what the name of that plant was. And the one I was calling Rainbow, you got to realize this is the early 70s. The one I was calling Rainbow, which was the name of one of my friends, was really Epilobium angustifolia, or fireweed. And so that made sense as a fire succession theory. And because of that, I really treated the plants, lack of better words, as friends more than anything else. After I finished a summer job, I realized I really liked it. And I wanted to learn way more about the actual uses of it. Because again, at this point in time, you got to realize the early 70s, the whole area of environmental biology was actually turning from understanding the biology to moving a little bit more directly into it could be apocalypse here. We got to prepare for the big crash. And so, soon as I finished my degree, I literally bought a teepee, moved out in the mountains to study plants. In that case, one of my professors suggested I write a paper or a book on edible medicinal plants. I'd already written a paper for him in his course, and that got me really diving deep into it. Lucky enough, I got to visit a large number of First Nation people and spend time with them because I was living in a teepee and living that lifestyle. So I did that for several years, and that got me deeper interested in it until it became a job of both teaching it at the local university, teaching continuing education courses, and that got me into the college. Then after that, so I started my own college instead of farming it all out to a university, and I started seeing patients, and it just mushroomed from that over a period of time.
Wow, great story. It does a lot of serendipity there leading you to that. And now a career spanning over 5 decades.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I think that anyone who knows you and your work, Terry, one of the things they would say is that you are just consistently staying present with what you do. And that incredible to see, as things change in the health sphere and what we as humans are experiencing ourselves is always changing. And so keeping up to date and relevant with that is really a strength of yours.
Well, probably my best hobby of all is I'm a quintessential researcher. I always like to research. In fact, even taking courses in AI and stuff like that to understand how that works. And that's actually been a boom over the last little while. But I always do want to do that. Plus, because we have a lot of students, it's really important. One of the policies we have at the college is people have to upgrade their courses every 5 to 10 years, depending on what they're doing. So it literally keeps you with a pulse on the whole area to be able to get the ideas out. and to fine tune that. And there's been a lot of changes, of course, in the last 50 years.
For sure. I've even heard some statistics that in some areas of health care, new research isn't really worked into curriculums for sometimes 30 plus years, let
Oh,
alone someone's practice.
well, actually, and academically, it says scientific research moves forward at the speed of academic funerals. Until a person at least retires or ends up dying, they become the head of that society, and it keeps on going like that. So it is that case, and I don't I don't like that. I'd have to say there's tons of things that I learned in university that we now know are completely false. A really simple one is um, funguses or mushrooms were considered plants or botanicals when I took it in university. Now we know they're their own kingdom. Well, that's a huge difference. I mean, it's almost an earthquake division of how organisms are on the planet. But even a very large amount of the physiological things I learned, because the program I was in was environmental biology, but it really was the same program pre med went into, and therefore I got deeper into medicine at the same time. That has changed considerably the way we treat it. And one of the biggest booms is taking the really ancient stuff and bringing it back too, because to understand the energetics of different cultures around the planet and integrating with modern scientific thing, that's one of my favorite things to do. And it's one of the best ways to treat with patients. It's the best thing. I think that's where the rubber hits the road, as they'd say. It's where we can actually learn how to do the nuance of why this person with Alzheimer's is different than this person with Alzheimer's, or it really brings us into the whole area of neurodivergence.
Yeah, and that is our topic for today. And I'm really excited to be exploring this with you. I was able to catch a workshop with you at our 50th anniversary gathering for Wild Rose College a couple of months ago, and I found it really interesting. This is such a um, just on the nose topic, very current, something that has come into the sphere relatively recently, and I am curious about how you came to start exploring this subject from a herbal and holistic perspective.
Well, first of all, I'd have to state that I have 4 kids, 3 of which are neurodivergent. So I got forced into the corner to understand that. Then little did I know that I was actually neurodivergent in many different ways. Of course, when I was growing up, I was never diagnosed with ADHD or dyslexia or dyspraxia or any of these things, which I have all of, and even a touch of autism. It depends on how you define the spectrum these days, because there wasn't names for them back then. ADHD or ADD was not even known about in the 60s when I was going through school. I was just a little bit odd. I was a little bit strange. Well, so are several of my children, not all of them. Different of them have different academic bent and different ways to go through things. But it was partly working with them, and partly because of that, I attracted a lot of students that way, and of course, a lot of patients that way. So really, it's like the patients that dictate what the practitioner is going to study. I had more and more people doing it because, well, I'd have to say that the field of herbal medicine just attracts neurodivergent people quite a bit. In fact, I'd have to say well more than 50% of my colleagues in the field are neurodivergent themselves, which is obviously way higher levels than it is in general society. In general society, it can be split anywhere from 3% to 20% are neurodivergent, depending on what your definition of neurodivergent. And I'd say it's over 50% in our industry.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it seems like we're learning more and more about the differences in the way people are processing and experiencing information in the world. It's a broad term that we use, neurodivergence. As you mentioned, it can cover a lot of different things, ADHD, autism, dyslexia. So how do you see it or frame or define that in your own practice?
Well, first of all, the biggest thing is to be able to figure out what are the challenges that people with neurodivergence face in their life and how we can work with them. Again, I am totally of the opinion that neurodivergence is a natural spectrum of the way our brain works in the world. In fact, there's a lot of anthropological and sociological papers being shown that neurodivergence was actually an ecological and social advantage for certain parts of cultures for over 99% of the history of our species. What do I mean by that? Well, they were the trackers, they were the hunters, they were the ones who would gather berries and stuff like that because their actual attitude worked on that. They didn't need to read and write, they didn't need to do mathematics. For the survival of our species, we had to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, and do things like that. And so people who are neurodivergent tend to see that. They're great gatherers and pickers. They're great trackers. And that's just natural because they see things. So, first of all, people have been looking for a long time. What's the genetic core of all this? Well, there is no genetic core of neurodiversity. It's literally a state of brain mind connection. But there is genetic function for sensitivity. So, really, what it comes down to is neurodivergent people are just different levels of sensitivity, some of who get overwhelmed by the various things. So, some of the autistic things that you see in people really come down to there's just so much information coming in, they want to shut it all out. And that will be to varying degrees. But again, the whole idea, certainly in the late 60s and early 70s, the concept of autism was known, but at that point in time, it was the really severely autistic people that couldn't communicate with the environment at all. Now we realize that spectrum has really broadened itself out to a much larger degree. And a lot of people think that at least 50, if not 75% of the people who would really fit on the spectrum are not even, don't even know that. And this seems to be a little bit more common in females than males because they seem to be the quiet person at the edge of the group that are just not interactions. People don't notice it. Interestingly enough, it's even being shown that people are who are trans tend to have that thing. So a trans woman, just to make sure we're all talking the same language, someone who might be born as a male, trans to a female, has a higher chance of being on the spectrum than a non-trans person in this because they take over the quality. In fact, some papers and some professors who are actually working in this area are trying to say that proves that trans is a real phenomena. It's a phenomenon of nature that we need it. And let's face it, almost every culture besides the white folk Western culture has really celebrated various sexes beyond male and female. And they've included a whole bunch of these because they had specific things to do in their society. So again, to come back all the way around, I'd say that neurodivergence had specific roles, specific jobs, specific ways of observing the planet that's been very beneficial for over 99% of the history of our species. Now we put people in little boxes, or I should say little desks, that they're only judged on reading and writing and arithmetic and things like that. And that's not necessarily the field that neurodivergent people fit into. There's
Mhm.
an old saying when evolutionists is trying to judge where a person is in evolution, if they have all the tests for a fish on writing or climbing a tree or whatever, a monkey would be very good at climbing a tree, but a fish couldn't do it at all, and a gorilla maybe, but certainly not an alligator. So they could all be in the same level of evolution. They just have different specialties.
Yeah, it does seem that in our Western culture that has really adapted to this modern industrialized way of living, we've certainly narrowed our view of um, just the way that people are and what is considered to be, acceptable. And that has to do with the ability to function within that system. So, as we're starting to open up that conversation around this, I know when I was younger, even the idea was that when neurodivergence was present, it was something to like fix and medicate and treat as an illness. Now, of course, we know that that perspective has changed quite a bit in the last couple decades, and we are seeing more providing tools and support, although that is still continues to be a challenge as the system isn't quite working as well in providing that support. But what kind of herbs, how do you approach that with herbs, that perspective of offering support?
I'll get there in a moment. I just want to readdress some of the great things that you just said. I want to sum it up to it's not a disease situation in neurodivergent. Actually, the one that's unhealthy is not the individual, it's a society that's unhealthy. They're not really being able to find the proper clues and be able to utilize the talents of a neurodivergent person. That's really what happens. And it's a little bit harder to change society. Yes, we can educate to a degree, we can do those things. But what we have to do is find ways to cope with the neurodivergent person living. So we don't want to fix them. We just want to do special things. So let's just consider as an analogy, instead of being a Prius, a neurodivergent person is more like a really an electric sports car or something, a specialty. So we'd have to use special things in there. Or let's say it's a gas thing. And so instead of using ordinary gas, we have to use premium gas. Well, this is very important with a neurodivergent people because of their sensitivity, they're sensitive to all kinds of foods and all kinds of preservatives and all kinds of chemicals. So they have to focus in on a more subtle diet. So one of their superpower strategies is to focus and learn how to focus on foods and things that's not going to overly stimulate them. Coming back to where your question was about herbs, so one of the best things we can do for this is use the fungi reishi. When I was spending time in China working with scholars over there on it, one of them said, "Well, really, what reishi does is they give bylines so the students can learn things over there. Reishi is designed to protect an academic from their own brain." Hmm. That sounds familiar to neurodivergent people because sometimes people get in their head too much and spin out and get going in there. Reishi just calms it down. So that was one of the first herbs I used both personally myself and I started working with my patients. So much so that CBC did a 20-minute special on how I was treating ADD back then, is what it was called, with reishis. And the teachers of the students brought it to light. And so they um, filmed them in their church, in their school, in the clinic, and stuff like that, showing if they were consuming reishi, they would be more focused because their whole nervous system would be calmed down, and it would help how their digestive tract would handle the whole thing. And by doing that, we don't fix the actual neurodivergence. What we do is we put literally a high octane fuel in them, or a fuel of calming them down so they can relate to society a little bit easier. So they can learn coping skills that would work with the disease entity, the society itself.
Right. Interesting. What's your recommended way of taking in reishi? Do you prefer a tincture or powder or?
It really doesn't matter, but there's no question the powder concentrates are the most efficient. Meaning that their way a tincture's all right, but that's a 1 in 5 tincture, whereas, an extract is an 8 to 15 to 1 extract the opposite direction, so it's 75 times stronger. So you can either take that as a powder and put it in some kind of drink. It's quite bitter, and so a lot of people don't like that, but if you put it in a bitter drink, for example, my wife, she uses it quite a bit, and she puts it in her coffee in the morning. And she's got so used to that being part of her coffee that if we're somewhere and we don't have it, she doesn't think the coffee tastes good anymore because she's used to that bitterness of the reishi. Myself, I've taken it in powder, put it in blended drinks. I find that it works really good with ginseng, but I'm an old guy that uses ginseng on a regular basis. So I put, a half a teaspoon or so in my ginseng and it tastes really good there. You can put it in smoothies, but a lot of people find it in capsules. Even though the most economical, and I would have to say the most efficient, is using the powder concentrate, the highest level of compliance is to take a capsule. And so I would have to say that I get most of my patients to either take a compressed pill of it or a capsule of it because that's what fits into their lifestyle.
And you did mention about sensitivity to foods and things that we're eating. How would you expand a little bit on that? Is that due to the actual additives? I know there's also a gut-brain connection when it comes to neurodivergence. So is that playing into that as well? How do you use the tools of nutrition and digestive health when you're working with
Well,
patients?
first of all, I gotta thank you for hitting the nail right on the head. Yes, diet is one of the biggest aspects besides some herbs. And there's all kinds of herbs and flower essences we can use, of course, but the diet becomes literally the core of our life. That's the fuel that runs us. So unfortunately, we can't take too strong of a fuel. So maybe my analogy of using the Jaguar might not be good. But it as a car, but it comes down to sugar is kind of too much for the average neurodivergent. So we have to really calm down that and calm down how it affects the microbiota because it really comes down to not us as much as um, how the food affects our microbiota and our mucosa. But when you really think, who are we? I'm not just the sum total of my genetics. I'm the sum total of my genetics, my chemicals, and my microbiome and my holobiome, the whole various thing that goes around me, because there's more non-me than there is me, meaning that for every cell I have in my body, I have at least 10 microorganisms of some type. So really what we have to do is feed that community properly. And that means specific diets. First of all, most of them don't like preservatives. Most of them don't like additives. Most of them, well, they love junk food, absolutely. But it's kind of like inviting some street gangs in and then they get in fights and stuff like that. And that causes all kinds of problems. So we want to be off that as much as possible. But unfortunately, people who are neurodivergent really have a lot of FOMO, fear of missing out. And so what I suggest is it's really important a couple times a year of going off a diet. This is true of almost any culture. They have festivals. Almost every culture has a festival 3 to 4 times a year where people get into non-normal lifestyle for a while. Debauchery and drinking and all kinds of festival foods and stuff like that for 2 to 4 days. Then after that, they go back to a normal diet. So sometimes the neurodivergents just need to, well, go to go to Burning Man or do something a little bit bizarre to do that, but get back in the straight and narrow after. So they don't have the fear of missing out. They have that kind of vacation, as it were, on their diet and then go back to a strict diet, which takes a while. If you're eating a lot of fast foods and junk foods and stuff like that, it takes at least 12 days to get back to a normal thing. That's why I created the herbal detox, actually, is to get people back to the straight and narrow. About the seventh day, you start seeing they can do the diet. At first, they're ready to kill you. When I met my wife, she had 3 food groups that she ate, um, bread, cheese, and Nutella. She's German. And those are the foods that she ate. I put her on a detox, and by the 3rd day, she was ready to kill me. But by the 7th day, she really liked it, and now she does more detoxes than I do now, just to get the keel back in the water so everything is normal, so we can work with our sensitivities, because once you know how to fine tune your lifestyle and your diet, you just feel so much better. You feel so much more glorious of how the world is, that that's the area you want to get into. That's the area you like because, well, we all want to feel better. And in the long run, all we're trying to do is help neurodivergence get to a place where they feel better. Really, one of the biggest problems is a lot of people have neurodivergence are very grumpy. They're not happy. They're bored with life. They don't know what to do. They're confused. They're just, again, too much more stimulus. If we can kind of put them almost in a, lack of better words, a Zen state with their diet, they feel like they fit in better and they just, well, they like themselves and the environment they're in way more. And that's what we have to celebrate with the neurodivergent people. So you're not fixing them. You're just showing them an alternate lifestyle that makes them feel better.
Yeah, that seems to be a challenge for any changes we're making in our lifestyle the first week or so of making something a habit. And I know that when it comes to diet and nutrition, that's one of the hardest things for people to shift.
It really is. So that's why a person has to come back, and that's why certainly I give the herbs. So, for example, if you're taking reishi on a regular basis, you're not as susceptible to as much push and pull because the reishi will take care of the microbiota to a degree. They'll calm down the body. They'll calm down the mind. They'll make it kind of a zen situation anyway. So they have a little bit more leeway of getting away with. But once a person gets back there, they go, oh, this is home. This is where I like it. It's kind of like, oh my God, I don't want to go on that hike. It's so hard to get at the top of the mountain. You get up on top of the mountain and you see it go, "Ah, that's so glorious. It's fantastic." Well, it's a little bit of a hike to see those beautiful views.
Yeah, it always takes a little work to get the best benefits and satisfaction, it seems like, in this life. I'm curious too, Terry. So, I understand reishi to be a very calming and balancing herb. That's the way I've always understood it. And when we think about the modern treatments for neurodivergence, I'm specifically really thinking of ADHD right now because it's often stimulants that are prescribed in the conventional system. So I think it was always confusing for me, and I started to understand after your talk how come stimulants seem to actually work the opposite on folks who are neurodivergent?
Well, that's true. First of all, they do work almost the opposite. So an awful lot of people who are actually prescribed the stimulants, after a while, they don't work, and they sell them to their schoolmates or whatever because they get a different reaction than they do, and they can make some money, so they can go on and buy, the real good drugs, as it were. That I mean, unfortunately, that's a sociological problem that's cropped up over the last 40 years. But coming back, really, how it is one of the things with this sensitivity and this observation is the nervous system of well, let's talk about the ADHD person specifically, since that's the question is their nervous system just works faster. And because it works faster, it uses up more energy. So it takes a tremendous amount of energy to do that. And literally what happens is they collapse and go, they go down. And so there's a gap between that. And we have all these various support cells around our nervous system because they don't have much energy themselves. The glial cells being the biggest, which is a fat based support thing. It's kind of like your backup battery you slap on the side of your iPhone or whatever when you know you're going to be out and about and you're not going to have a chance to charge it in. It charges it up. Well, what happens with the stimulants? It stimulates the glial cells to be able to do that. Now, you need certain fatty acids in your diet, and that's why things like omega-3 oil and evening primrose oil and stuff like that, by having those oils in the diet or fish, things like that, it'll actually give a backup because if we do too much glucose to do it, it just speeds everything up. But we have an alternate mechanism for our mitochondria that works on this whole thing to build the energy up. We can either use fat metabolism or we can use sugar metabolism. Sugar or glucose in this case is instant energy, but the oil one is a based up energy. So instead of just having money in your pocket that you're going out and spending on the day, you actually have some money in the bank so you can go to an ATM and take some things out. So what the stimulant drugs do is stimulate that thing to be able to make up the change over a period of time. So it is stimulating, and that feels normal. It's kind of like getting a cup of espresso in the afternoon when your energy's down. It just picks it up and it makes them feel normal. Now, I want to be real specific here. Whenever you do that, it's like borrowing money on a credit card, as it were. You have to pay the money back with interest. So you have to have some downtime just to be able to do that. But the stimulants will really work with that. So it'll make a person be able to sit in a desk and be more concentrated because there's enough things going on inside of them. They don't get the FOMO as much. They don't get the situation of the sensitivities overwhelming. They can just motoring on through, but they still need some downtime. May that be playing video games, may that be watching various Netflix or YouTube things or whatever, and that's one of the reasons that people who have these things have a tendency towards like doing that couch potato time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for explaining that so well, because I think that's one of the things that can sometimes seem a little bit confusing about understanding ADHD with, the word hyperactivity is in the term attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but oftentimes folks aren't necessarily experiencing hyperactivity in the way that they're presenting, or yeah, they need these long periods of
And so
downtime.
because of it, the various stimulants that they might use only work for a certain period of time. That period of time happens to be very coincidental to work through the school time, meaning that, for the first 18 or 20 years it'll work, but after a while it doesn't work anymore. Some people it stops working around 14 or 15, and that's why they're selling it. They're getting rid of it to give to somebody else to do something else.
So in this sort of a case, these stimulants become ineffective really in managing symptoms. Is there is this more difficult to then support someone with herbal and lifestyle things, would you say, after a period of being on these?
Well, again, the job of a herbalist is to be able to help the person live in the life that their patient is in. So I'd have to say is well over 50% of the um, ADHD or ADD people I've seen over the year are also doing pharmaceuticals. So they can be used simultaneously. And lots of times, both their family just wants them to be medicated so they can get through their life, to get through the school, to be able to get their credentials behind them before they make a change. So you can do both. There's no question it works better if they just ride on the flower essences and the reishi and some mushrooms and the oils and stuff like that in a strict diet. But in a real world, that doesn't always work. So it's good time. So lots of times I would have the families with this, I would get them to do the medication during the academic year, but not take any of it during the summer year time. So they would have a break from it. So it would still work again when they needed it. So we live in a real world, and sometimes people have to show up and follow a certain set of rules. And if the person's not capable, then we medicate for a period of time or do both so it doesn't wear out the system. We still give the person the right oils. We still give the person the right diet when they're on Ritalin or whatever the prescription might be for them. And some of them are not a stimulant now as they used to be, but at least gives them a place because one of the biggest problems with people with neurodivergence is not the actual act. It's the masking they have to do through society to fit in. And more importantly than that is the lack of self-worth. A lot of people come up with, "Oh my god, I'm no good because I can't do this. I can't get an A in arithmetics, or my spelling is really bad, or I have such bad dyslexia I can't even speak properly." All those kind of things, and that really hammers the self-worth of a person. So you have to weigh the sociological things, the pharmaceutical things, with the herbal things to really have an impact in individual people's lives. And that's the job of a practitioner, is trying to see what fits for that person and lots of times that family so they can get through the various hurdles they need to do to get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's reminds me of a conversation I recently had with David Winston. We were talking about eclectic medicine, and at the end of the day, what that is we use the tools that the client or the patient needs, and what works, and that's what we do. And it
Yes,
sounds
and well, David and I have known each other as buddies for many, many years. We've been in the same field, and so I respect the way he works with that.
yeah.
And did I mention that several colleagues have various neurodivergent issues in their life?
Yeah, I think that's something that I have also seen and experienced in this field as well. And this is another interesting thing. I wanted to ask you if I know that after speaking, I've spoken to Yarrow about this. Your son, and his own growing up and being exposed to some different kinds of educational systems. So things like Waldorf schools, there's different ways of
Yes.
educating children that are not very common or really accessible. Most of them are private. They cost quite a bit of money that's not available to a lot of folks. However, I am curious to know if you've noticed or seen these different systems of education benefiting or being more supportive of folks, children with neurodivergence.
There's no question about it. For Yarrow, the Waldorf system was a perfect fit for his sister. She ended up being a really smart academic, and she's a professor in a top university right now. I mean, that's where she's gone with her academia, and she never really had these issues, as it were. But some of them get crammed into for economic reasons or sociological or availability. They get crammed into the public system, and it's just not as supportive because they're really trying to deal with the group, whereas the all Waldorf school really tries to deal with the individual and where they fit, and they let a person when they're still young to be educated more through games and through music and through plays and stuff like that. And that really worked out very well for Yarrow. And so it helped him gain the personality he has, which is really very beneficial. So there's no question if you can get the person into one thing. But the real big thing is it's not one size fits all. It's the one that works for that individual at that time in their life.
Hmm. Yeah, it's always individual with the holistic medicine. Um, you mentioned just a little while ago about sugar, the difference between how the body's getting energy and the brain's getting energy, sugar or fat based. And I'm curious if that uh, has anything to do with like a ketogenic diet and if that has shown to have any benefits for.
Um, a a ketogenic diet has benefit, but it's equally as problematic. So a ketogenic diet is better to pulse on and off. So if you do a diet for 3 months, a strict one, it can have benefit, but then it starts going down in benefit after the 3 months. By 6 months, it can actually have create irreparable damage to the body. So we would suggest you do it. Say even with intermittent fasting, it's the same kind of thing, but not to the same degree. You want to pulse it on and off over a period of time, or a much more common thing that practitioners are using is switching. They'll switch from one diet to another diet to another diet that almost are diametrically opposed to each other in some ways, so they don't get too habit formed. No question, the oil in a ketogenic diet, if they do the right oils, but things like avocado oil and olive oil and the fish oils and stuff like that are extremely beneficial for building this all up. Because in our culture, we don't have that much availability. We think that the whole world's driven by carbs. You get up in the morning, you have a carb breakfast with a carb chaser, and you keep on going on like that. And so we end up running our mitochondria almost completely on sugar and glucose to the point that we get addicted to it. Whereas a lot of other cultures, especially Asian cultures, they get a lot of their energy out of oil, stir fry vegetables, fish, um, seafood, and stuff like that, and therefore they didn't get ADD and ADHD as much. Segue forward to a modern diet that you're finding throughout all Asia, and it's quite prevalent there now. So in the younger people there, so we can almost use that as a petri dish to see how that changed over a period of 1, 2 decades.
Interesting. Yeah. So jumping off from some of the diet and lifestyle ways of providing support, you've also mentioned flower essences, which is such an interesting topic. I know that your teachings on flower essences are some of my favorite because your ability to take something that can seem very esoteric and difficult to bring into this our physical material understanding of reality is something that you're very good at, Terry. And I loved your flower essence courses and all the talks you've done. So I'm curious about what specific flower essences you have found helpful or blends, and how do the flower essences work? on a person who is dealing with neurodivergence?
Well, you've packed a lot of things in that one question, so I'll try to write them all. But first of all, there's no question that flower essence can really, really help this area. But and a rule of flower essence is you repertorize or you create a formula for each individual person in the situation they're in. But because over the years I've had so many people coming in the ADD, ADHD spectrum area, that I developed a formula I used almost standardly called focus. And it was really to help a person focus. So it really had to do with working with their sensitivities and being able to shield them and bound them. And one of the biggest things in flower essences of shielding is literally yarrow. So you have the white yarrow, kind of like putting the white light around you. You have the yellow yarrow that protects your spirit and your intellectual things and kind of social things. And you have the pink yarrow to protect your heart. So nobody can wound you in a heart way. So by doing those yarrows together will help all 3 of them or 1 or 2 of them, which are a big part of that. But there's also ones that'll get you out of your head into your heart. So you can use things like barrage. You can use things like nasturtium, which stops you from really thinking too much, et cetera, and they'll calm you down. So they work on more of a vibrational level. Because we think the only way we communicate with our body is through our nervous system and our endocrine system. Traditional physiology says those are the only things that run it. But now we know that there's an endocannabinoid thing that was discovered from pot, but it's almost electromagnetic frequency that runs the whole thing. And it's how the microbiota communicate with the various cells in our body, et cetera, et cetera. So it really has nothing to do with cannabis at all. But the long and the sense of it, that this electromagnetic field is really is at a level that's above the physical level, and it changes the tone. It changes the tune. It changes the music you're listening to in your life. So if you're taking something like the focus, you have kind of calming music going back with your underscore of your life theme song that's going along. And therefore, you can be able to relax with things and you can be able to deal with them better. So as an individual formula, we often use the focus, or a person can get a whole kit and work and blend their own ones together, and there's questionnaires can work on that. And yeah, you'd have to take the flower essence course to really understand it completely.
Yeah, that is a subject that's a bit big and out of the scope of the time we have left today, but it
You gotta understand, I grew up in a world of academia where I was really studying biochemistry and science and stuff like that, and so when I was first introduced to flower essence, I thought, "This is absolute crap. There is no way this can work." But the proof of the pudding's in the eating. You get pushed up against the wall in a clinical situation, you gotta help somebody, and you give them a flower essence, "Damn, that really worked." And then you have to get back to literally understanding it at a quantum level of how it works, because that's where again, yes, we can have the rubber hit the pavement, but wouldn't it be better to get the vibration on a quantum level that just does it? That's why I like flower essences.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely wanna hit the vibration on the quantum level, although, like you, I wasn't always that way. I definitely was a skeptic. I feel like I got into everything I've gotten into has come a little bit, from the perspective of being a skeptic, "Let's see if this'll work, but flower essences were certainly one of those ones that did blow me away with how effective, gentle, just incredible they are, and I am fully a convert. So then they're great to use with kids as well. Would you agree?
Absolutely. So we have another one that I've often used an awful lot with people on the spectrum. Is called children's super hug. And literally, lots of times the kid's just wanting attention, just wanting love. And so by giving them flower essence, like a big hug, is all the person on the spectrum needs at that point in time. Just like my dog, it just needs to be patted every once in a while and go, good girl, good girl. That's all they really need. Sure, they'll take treats and stuff like that, but they'd rather have the pat on the head and the good girl sign than they do with actually getting a little treat.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is so lovely about flower essences is how gentle they are, although they're also quite powerful in their efficacy. So for I know a lot of folks who are dealing with trying to support someone with neurodivergence is because it's their parents and it's their children, and maybe the parents also, have dealt with this in their lives because it seems to be something that those generations right now are really able to have the language around even describing, understanding, or seeking out a lot of alternative supports these days because of some concerns around some of like the what you've mentioned with some of the medications and how while they can be helpful, there can be some longer term issues. So for parents or caregivers, what would be some of the most accessible herbal and holistic treatments to recommend or starting points?
Well, the biggest thing is watching their diet. The second biggest thing is giving them something like reishi, so they don't have to watch their diet so much. And the third biggest thing is it's all right for them to go crazy every once in a while. You know, sure, if you don't give them an environment to do that, they're gonna scribble all over your walls and stuff like that. But if you give them a great big piece of paper they can scribble all over and do their art, then they get that expression part out of them without destroying your property. So you have to. It's kind of like, you know, uh, um, uh, I can remember that, where you pound the gophers and stuff like that. Things will at the fairgrounds well, I don't remember the name of it.
Whack-a-mole.
Yeah, that one. And so you have to be able to figure out strategies. I mean, that's the job of being a parent. The job of being a parent is trying to figure out how to stop the whack-a-mole from taking over the world and be able to have different things you can use in different situations. And literally, all they're really trying to do is look for attention. And if you don't give them positive attention, well, they'll get it as negative attention.
Yeah, it seems like a meeting of what we're taking in and the environment, which isn't that really the way to look at all things holistically as a
And,
support.
you can't always do things the way that you got taught. Things are changing. So as things go down the generations, we have to change our point of view and our way of doing with it because, well, definitely the kids that are being born these days are quite different. I have kids that expand over 45 years of age, and because of that I've had to adapt different parenting skills to different children at different ages of how they act and how they react to their environment.
That Terry, you are setting a great bar, I think, for a lot of folks. And I do know that a lot of people struggle with that and that adaptation. We see that in our society. There's always resistance to change and to the way we're seeing things. And we even do see that today in sociological areas of folks just not accepting that there are different ways of being and different ways that our brains and bodies work and process. And this sort of idea of a idealized, homogenized type of person is very prevalent in our modern society. So we have seen some shifts in the last few decades, I believe. I'm sure you've seen a lot over your time as a professional in this world, but do you see looking ahead, um, anything that's like exciting and new and where this research and conversations are going around neurodivergence and support, herbal or otherwise?
Well, again, I want to go back to one of the original statements we talked about is it's not the neurodivergent that has the problem. It's not a disease. It's the society itself is. So some of the ways of being able to work on that into the future is to be able to create groups and support areas that might almost be festivals and things unto themselves where people who go through the neurodivergence can feel alive, can feel that they fit in. So they get a aha moment in their own life, get that right feeling. Because once they get that feeling, they're going to be chasing that high, that feeling for the rest of their life. So they'll tend to go towards it themselves. But our society does change along the line, and we want it to change, but we have to be able to have a place for the people who have the different issues coming along. We might have so many neurodivergence. That's how society comes. Then you have your really strict and centered person that's, you know, very specific I'm gonna use an analogy from astrology, Virgo type person that really needs every step right in front of himself, then they're gonna be the outliers. So we need a space for them too. We call them bureaucrats and accountants. No,
We really do need a variety of folks
of course we do.
to make these human.
Vive la différence.
Yeah. Yeah, and that seems to be being embraced more and more in our Western ideas is really the differences that we have and how we can thrive together. So that's great. Terry, we know we can find you at Wild Rose College, where you've got several programs and many courses, including, I believe, you do have one coming up on neurodivergence.
Yes, it's just at the production stage. I mean, what I'm saying is it's been completed, all the videos have been done, all the literature's been done and stuff like that, but it takes a long period of time of getting even the final edited videos and stuff like that in the right location and error checked and all those kind of things. I think it's supposed to be coming out in January of 26. Again, it's in the hands of the staff to be able to work with it right now. So it'll be coming out then. There's various seminars like this podcast and a few that we have on the village, etc., that people can get more access to it or along the lines. But it's just the long lead time to publish anything these days.
Well, it doesn't feel that far away as time seems to be moving quickly, but we'll look forward to that. And so, if you're listening and you want to learn more about neurodivergence, holistic supports, and herbalism, you can always go and check out Wild Rose College and keep up to date on the new course. Also, Terry, I know you have a great blog. So, where can people find your blog and your.
Well, drterrywillard.com is my blog page, but I gotta admit that I've been so pulled away by creating other content that I haven't really kept it up to date as much. If you happen to be in the Toronto area, which I know you are, and you go to the CHFA, we're going to be doing our whole presentation through Tallgrass at the convention. We're going to be doing a series of 4 talks there on the whole area of neurodivergence and how it fits in to be changing things along to keep the theme rolling.
Great, great. So,
Yes,
lots of
late
opportunities.
September somewhere. I don't remember the exact dates.
Okay, we might not have this out before then, but there's lots of other opportunities to explore this. And if you want to connect with Terry, of course, through Wild Rose College or his blog. And Terry, just again, thank you so much. Your decades and decades of clinical experience and as an educator, the way you share it so generously is just a gift to all of us
Well,
humans.
thank you, Megan.
Okay, thanks for being with us, and we will see you later.
Okay, until next time. Good day.